Hi, I'm David Reddig, CEO of Synoptis, and I am continuing our series on 4 leadership myths and how you can overcome them. Today we'll be talking about myth number 3, leadership is an on-off switch. Synoptis provides all the services you need for IT operational excellence in your company. That's people through leadership coaching and development, digital transformation of your organization, strategic planning. We also provide Salesforce architecture and application development and change management. So first, I'd like to talk about the word leader versus leadership. And these terms are often conflated. People say, well, I'm in leadership, or I'm a leader, I'm the department leader, or I'm in the department's leadership. And really, those are two separate terms. I like to one of my favorite researchers is David V. Day, Dr. Day, posed that leadership development and leader development, conflating those terms was causing confusion and led to the results we're seeing nowadays where businesses are investing large amounts of money in leadership development, what they would call leadership development, and not seeing many results. And that's why earlier in this series, we talked about leadership development not working. That's another myth that you can see in an earlier episode. This conflation of this confusion between leader and leadership is part of that problem. We're trying to do one thing, and really the training isn't focused in the right area. So when I think of leader versus leadership, I like to think of being something versus doing something. And let's dig into that a little bit. So leader development is being something. Leader development says these are the characteristics that a leader must have. A leader must be honest. A leader must be transparent. A leader must be charismatic. A leader must be courageous. You've worked in organizations that probably have these characteristics. Maybe they have a cute little poster or signs hanging up around the office talking about the characteristics of a leader. And they say, do you have these characteristics? Then you're a leader. If you don't have these characteristics, you're not a leader. And some organizations even go so far as to say, these characteristics, you either have them, you are a leader, or you don't have them, you are not a leader, and you can't develop them, which is an entirely antiquated idea. But it ties directly back to that idea of leader development. Leaders have some characteristic, some special attribute that non-leaders don't have. Many of the leadership books that are available on the mass market have that same myth in place. They talk about, well, a leader needs to be transparent, or a leader needs to be charismatic, or a leader needs to be caring. I'm not saying those are wrong. I'm saying they're not really helpful because they say, well, you need to be caring, and you're like, oh, well, how do I do that? How do I go from where I'm at to this magical state of suddenly being something else? Leadership development, on the other hand, is things that a leader does that produces results. And ultimately, that's what leadership and leader development should do. You're going from leaders to leadership to business results. And that missing last step is really why there's such a disenchantment, such disillusionment in executive coaching, leadership development, is that we don't get to those business results. And you can see, if you look at this series, right, there's a set of stages. If you're sending people to leader development, they have to learn to apply that to things they do in your organizational culture, which then leads to business results. So it's 2 steps away from actually getting to the business results that you want. And that's a challenge for a lot of people, getting from leader development to leadership behaviors to results. By bypassing the leader development portion and focusing on the leadership development, Synoptis bypasses that first stage. Not bypasses. We focus more on the leadership development, which naturally produces business results faster. So leaders focus on becoming. As I said before, you either are or are not. And in some organizational cultures, they believe that if you don't have some attribute that they perceive as a key characteristic of a leader, then you'll never become a leader. Unfortunately, the data, the research, the science of leadership development doesn't support that, and my experience doesn't support that. I've worked in a number of organizations, from $100 million companies to multi-billion-dollar Fortune 200 companies, and led leadership development. And I believe anyone with the appropriate attitude, coaching, and training can become a leader and affect organizational results. Leadership focuses on actions. So we're trying to, what actions can a leader do that produces results? But back to the initial question. So we're going to talk about those behaviors, the leadership behaviors, not the leader characteristics. We're going to talk about those actions that produce results. And the initial myth was leadership is an on or off switch. And the idea is that there's a nonlinear relationship between actions and results. And what do I mean here? So some people assume that leadership is linear, and it's not. A linear leadership says, well, if you have a certain amount of, if you have a characteristic, if you have a quantity of, let's say, 1, charisma, and you increase that to 2, well, that's twice as good. And if you increase that to 3, that's, again, 3 times as good as 1 and 4 and 5. And so you continue to move up this linear scale. And the more you do something, the better it is for the organization. Transparency is a good example. So if you're not a transparent leader, if you keep your cards close to your chest, then you are very low in transparency. But then as you become more transparent and more transparent and more transparent, and as you increase your transparency, you become a better and better leader. But that's not always the case. In some organizations, transparency, and that may be in some organizations, but in some organizations, transparency could be a diminishing return. They want you to have a certain level of transparency with your team. There are things that you want to share, but then there's this need for professional distance as well. Or it could be an organization where that diminishing return flattens out earlier. It could be, we want you to be somewhat, we want to be transparent about metrics and business metrics, but not futures in the organization. Or we want to be completely transparent in the organization, but where how your organization functions on that one characteristics varies from organization to organization. It could be a curvilinear distribution where a certain amount of a characteristic, let's say charisma, your organization wants you to have a certain charismatic behaviors that will affect organizational change. Particularly charismatic behaviors tend to affect transformation and tend to affect employee engagement. So there's a certain amount that's optimal for your organization. You can see on this curve, it peaks out at a certain point. But if you go beyond that, then you are falling out of line with the culture. You are falling out of line with what is effective in your particular organization. And if you just assume that every leadership characteristic is this linear incline, you are not going to function optimally within your organization. When you start stacking the different leadership behaviors within an organization, you can see that some leadership behaviors, there's a early, you do a certain amount and boom, that's the optimal amount of that characteristic. Some of them, they continue to grow, and some of them have that sort of curvilinear distribution where you get a certain amount, and if you go beyond that, you're starting to become less and less effective. Assessing and understanding those different leadership characteristics and how they fit into your organizational culture are important to have effective leadership development. What happens if you don't? Well, you do a cookie cutter approach to leadership development that results in leader development or leadership development, but no business results. There's without understanding the contextual state of your business leadership culture, attempting leadership development, you get no results. And again, that leads us back to why this reticence to invest in leadership development. Good organizations realize that this cookie cutter approach doesn't produce the results they need, and they're desperately searching for something else. So how do you overcome this? Well, again, you look for good leadership training. Good leadership training is individualized. It deals with the person, where they're at on their individual curves of different leadership characteristics, and individualized in that it differentiates between leader development, the characteristics, and leadership development, doing the things, which ultimately produces business outcomes. If you're not producing business outcomes as a result of your leadership training, it's not good training, period. It needs to be contextually relevant. And contextually relevant here means that your business has an understanding of what their leadership culture looks like. And ultimately, you're looking for long-term results. And long-term results comes from the iterative development and moving along those curves to the point where you get at the optimal level of leadership performance. So I hope this was a helpful brief video talking about why the delineation, the separation between leader and leadership was important. I hope it answered some of your questions about why you're attending these conferences or reading books and it just doesn't feel like it's fitting in your organization. And if you're really struggling with how to become a better leader in your organization, Synoptis is here to help. Thanks for the time. We'll see you next time.